The doctor didn't hand me a prescription for my blood pressure. He didn't hand me a referral for a specialist. He looked me dead in the eye with a terror I had never seen in a medical professional and shoved a crumpled piece of paper into my jacket pocket. His lips barely moved, but I read the word perfectly. Run. That night, I discovered that the people who were supposed to love me the most were the ones holding the shovel for my grave. If you have ever felt like something was wrong in your own home but you couldn't prove it, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from, and if you trust your intuition. My name is Tom Bennett. I am 70 years old. For 40 years, I was a structural engineer in Chicago. I understood how things stood up. I understood stress fractures and load-bearing walls. I knew that if the foundation was rotten, the whole building would come down. But I never realized the foundation of my own family was built on a swamp of lies until this very moment. I sat on the crinkly paper of the exam table in Dr. Evans's office. The air smelled of rubbing alcohol and expensive cologne. My wife Patricia sat in the corner chair scrolling through her phone. My son Lucas stood by the door checking his watch every 30 seconds. They were not there to support me. They were there to supervise me. Dr. Evans pressed the stethoscope to my chest. I could hear my own heart thumping a slow, uneven rhythm. I took a deep breath to speak. I wanted to tell him that my head felt like it was full of cotton wool. I wanted to tell him that I had lost 10 pounds in 2 weeks. But before I could get a word out, Patricia spoke up. Her voice was sweet, sickeningly sweet, like honey mixed with arsenic. "Oh, doctor, he has been so confused lately," Patricia said without even looking up from her screen. "He forgets where he is. Yesterday he thought he was back on a construction site. It is just so hard watching him fade away like this." Lucas chimed in immediately. "Yeah, Doc. He gets agitated too. My wife Megan has been giving him those vitamins you recommended, but he still has these episodes. Maybe we need to increase the dosage." I gripped the edge of the exam table. My knuckles turned white. I wanted to shout that I was not confused. I wanted to shout that I did not need more vitamins. But my tongue felt thick in my mouth. My limbs felt heavy like I was moving through underwater currents. This was the new normal. For the past 3 months, I had been living in a fog. They told me it was early onset dementia. They told me I was losing my mind. And when 2 people you love tell you something every single day, you start to believe it. Dr. Evans did not answer them. He kept the stethoscope on my chest for a long time. Too long. He moved it to the left, then to the right. His brow was sweating. It was 68 degrees in the room, but he was sweating. He pulled the stethoscope away and turned to his desk. He started writing in my file. Patricia stood up. She smoothed her skirt. "That skirt cost $2,000. I paid for it. Everything in this room. Everything they wore. Everything they drove. I paid for it all. I built skyscrapers. I climbed steel beams 500 feet in the air when I was 30. I designed the wind-bracing systems for towers that withstood tornadoes. Now I was being treated like a toddler who needed a nap." "I need to check my messages," Patricia said. "The signal in here is terrible." She walked toward the window, turning her back to us. Lucas stepped out into the hallway to answer a call. I heard him say something about a concrete supplier. We were alone. For 5 seconds, we were alone. Dr. Evans moved fast. He did not look like a doctor anymore. He looked like a man defusing a bomb. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight. Painful. It woke me up from my fog for a second. He jammed a small, folded piece of paper into the breast pocket of my blazer. "Don't react," he whispered. The sound was barely a breath. "Just act normal." I looked at him. His eyes were wide and pleading. He looked terrified. Not for himself, for me. Patricia turned back around. Dr. Evans immediately stepped back and put on a fake, professional smile. Everything looks stable considering his condition, Dr. Evans said. His voice cracked slightly. I think we should keep him on the current regimen. No changes today. Patricia smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just been told the prey was still limping. Good, she said. Come on, Tom. Let's go home. Megan is making your favorite soup tonight. I slid off the table. My legs felt like jelly. I looked at my hands. These hands used to be steady as a rock. These hands used to hold precision drafting pens. These hands used to sign checks for millions of dollars. Now they trembled. I walked to the door. Patricia took my arm. It looked like a gesture of affection to anyone watching, but I felt her fingers digging into my bicep. She wasn't holding me up. She was steering me. We walked out to the parking lot. The Chicago wind hit my face. It felt good. It felt real. For a second, the fog cleared. Why was the doctor sweating? Why did he give me a note? We reached the car. It was a black SUV. Luxury, leather seats, soundproof glass. I bought this car last year so we could take road trips. Now it looked like a hearse. Lucas was already in the driver's seat. He revved the engine. Get in, Dad, Lucas said. Stop staring at the sky. We have places to be. I climbed into the back seat. The leather was cold. Patricia got in the front passenger seat. She slammed the door. The sound echoed like a gunshot. As we pulled out of the medical center parking lot, I saw Dr. Evans standing in the window of his office on the second floor. He was watching us. He had one hand on the glass. I waited until we were on the main road. Patricia was busy looking at photos on Instagram. Lucas was driving aggressively, weaving through traffic. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I slowly reached into my pocket. My fingers touched the paper. It felt hot. I pulled it out carefully, keeping it low below the line of the front seats. I unfolded it in my lap. The handwriting was scribbled and rushed. It was written on the back of a prescription pad. I read the words. Then I read them again. My blood ran cold. The fog in my brain vanished instantly, replaced by a sharp, icy shot of adrenaline. The note said, Your blood work is alarming. You have lethal levels of digoxin in your system. You are not sick. You are being poisoned. Do not go home. If you go home tonight, you will never wake up. Run. I stared at the word digoxin. I knew what that was. It was heart medication. But I didn't have a heart condition. My heart was the strongest part of me. Poisoned. The vitamins. The blue pills Megan gave me every night with dinner. She said they were for memory. She said they were antioxidants. They were killing me. I looked at the back of Lucas's head. My son. The boy I taught to play baseball. The boy I put through private school. The boy I handed my company to. I looked at Patricia. My wife. The woman who swore to love me in sickness and in health. They weren't taking care of me. They were executing me. And they were doing it slowly so nobody would ask questions. Panic rose in my throat like bile. I needed to get out. Now. We were slowing down for a red light at the intersection of State Street. This was my chance. If I opened the door, I could roll out. There were people on the sidewalk. Witnesses. I could scream for help. I crumbled the note in my fist. I took a deep breath. I reached for the door handle. I pulled. Nothing happened. I pulled again. Harder. The handle moved, but the door didn't budge. I looked down. There was no mechanical resistance. It was disengaged. I heard a soft chuckle from the front seat. I looked up. Lucas was looking at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were cold. Dead. There was no love in them. Only calculation. comfortable back there, Dad?" Lucas asked. His voice was calm, too calm. I didn't answer. I pulled the handle again frantically. "Don't bother," Patricia said without turning around. She was applying lipstick in the visor mirror. Ruby red lipstick. "Lucas put the child lock on," she said casually, as if commenting on the weather. "We wouldn't want you having an episode and wandering off into traffic, would we, Tom? It's for your own safety." The light turned green. Lucas slammed on the accelerator. The car surged forward, pushing me back into the seat. I looked out the window. The city was blurring past. We weren't going toward the highway. We were taking the back route. The route through the forest preserve. The route where there were no cameras and no witnesses. I looked at the note in my hand again. Run. But I couldn't run. I was trapped in a soundproof box with my executioners, and we were heading straight for the slaughterhouse. The silence inside the cabin of the black SUV was heavier than any steel beam I had ever lifted. Outside the tinted windows, the Chicago skyline was retreating into the distance, replaced by the gray blur of the highway barriers. I pressed my back against the leather seat and forced my breathing to slow down. My heart was a jackhammer against my ribs, but I could not let them see it. If I hyperventilated, if I showed even a flicker of the panic that was clawing at my throat, Lucas would pull over and sedate me right there on the shoulder of the interstate. I had to be the Tom Bennett of 20 years ago. The engineer who could stand on a swaying platform 50 stories up and calmly calculate wind shear. I needed information. I needed to know how deep the rot went before we reached the house. I looked at Patricia. She was still staring at her phone, her thumb scrolling rhythmically. The blue light from the screen illuminated her face, making her look pale and statuesque, like a marble figure I had bought and placed in my home without ever checking if it had a soul. "Patricia," I said. My voice sounded raspy but steady. I was thinking about the liquidity in the trust. Did the dividend transfer from the bond maturity come through yesterday? It was a substantial amount. She froze. Her thumb hovered over the screen. For a fraction of a second, the mask of the concerned wife slipped. Her jaw tightened. She didn't look at me. She looked out the window. "Tom, why are you worrying about money right now?" She asked, her tone sharp like a teacher scolding a slow child. "You know getting agitated is bad for your pressure. Lucas and I are handling the accounts. You just need to focus on resting." "I am not agitated," I said, pushing just a little harder. "I am just asking a question. It is my money, Patricia. Or at least it was until 2 weeks ago." She finally turned to me. Her eyes were narrow. There was no warmth there, only annoyance. "It is our money, Tom. We are a family. And honestly, you asking these repetitive questions is exactly why Dr. Evans said you are deteriorating. You are obsessing. Just stop it." She turned back to her phone, effectively dismissing me. But I had seen enough. The defensive snap. The refusal to make eye contact. She wasn't managing my finances. She was draining them. I looked forward. Through the windshield, I saw the green exit sign for the interstate. We were supposed to go straight. The fastest way to our estate in Barrington was the highway. But Lucas flicked the blinker and steered the massive car off the ramp. "Where are we going, Lucas?" I asked. "This isn't the way home." "Construction on the main road, Dad," Lucas lied. His voice was too smooth, too practiced. "GPS rerouted us." I looked at the dashboard navigation screen. It was black. He had turned it off. We were heading toward the forest preserves. Miles of dense woods winding 2-lane roads and absolute darkness once the sun went down. It was a route with no traffic cameras, no toll booths, no witnesses. A cold realization washed over me, colder than the air conditioning blasting from the vents. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was the endgame. My mind flashed back to the office of my attorney Arthur just 14 days ago. I was sitting in the mahogany chair feeling that familiar heaviness in my limbs, that mental fog that made it hard to focus on the words on the page. I thought it was Alzheimer's. I thought my brain was betraying me. Patricia had been holding my hand, squeezing it gently. Lucas had been standing behind me, a hand on my shoulder. "Dad, this is just a precaution," Lucas had said. "It just gives me the power to pay the bills and manage the medical decisions if you have a bad day. You are still the boss." Arthur, a man I had played golf with for 30 years, had nodded solemnly. "It is standard, Tom. It is for your protection." And I believed them. I trusted them. I took the gold-plated pen and signed the power of attorney. I signed over the voting rights to my company shares. I signed over access to the offshore accounts. I signed over the medical directives. I thought I was being a responsible patriarch, ensuring my family was safe before my mind faded away. I was such a fool. I wasn't sick. I was drugged. Every morning with my coffee, every evening with my soup, they were feeding me poison to mimic the symptoms of dementia. And the moment the ink dried on those papers, I ceased to be a father or a husband. I became a liability, a loose end that needed to be tied up. I looked at my hands resting on my knees. They were shaking, but not from age, from rage. I had handed them the weapon, loaded it, and pointed it at my own chest. The car slowed down. The smooth hum of the tires on asphalt changed to the crunch of gravel. We were deep in the preserve now. The trees crowded the road, their branches interlocking overhead like the bars of a cage. It was twilight, that gray hour where everything loses its color. "Why are we stopping?" I asked. Lucas didn't answer. He put the car in park but kept the engine running. He pulled his phone from the center console. It was ringing. "I have to take this," he muttered. "It is the site foreman." He didn't step out of the car. He stayed in the driver's seat, seemingly confident that the old man in the back was too senile to understand. Or maybe he just didn't care anymore. He answered the phone. "Yeah," he said. I leaned forward slightly, straining my ears against the hum of the engine. "We are about 20 minutes out," Lucas said. He looked in the rearview mirror, meeting my eyes. He didn't look away. "Yeah, the plans are in motion," he continued. "No, don't worry about the autopsy. The cremation order is already signed. Patricia handled it." My blood turned to ice. Cremation. That was how they would hide the poison. No body, no evidence. Lucas listened for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. Make sure the railing is loose. We need it to look like he wandered out onto the deck confused and fell. A tragic accident." "Yeah. Tonight. We will be there soon." He hung up the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. He put the car back in gear. The locks clicked again, echoing in the silent cabin. Lucas turned around fully this time. He smiled. It was the smile of a boy who had finally won the game he had been cheating at for years. "Ready to go home, Dad?" he asked. "It is going to be a long night." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The air in the car felt thin, like we were at high altitude. They weren't just going to kill me. They were going to erase me. They were going to throw me off my own balcony and cry at my funeral while counting my money. I looked down at the door handle again. It was useless. I looked at the window. Reinforced glass. I was trapped in a mobile hearse being driven to my own execution by my own son. But as the car lurched forward, crunching over the gravel, a spark ignited in the darkness of my mind. They thought I was feeble. They thought I was confused. They thought the poison had broken me. They were wrong. I was an engineer. I solved problems for a living. And this was just a problem. A complex, deadly structural failure. I didn't have to be strong. I just had to be smarter than the stress load they were putting on me. I touched the pocket of my jacket, feeling the crinkle of the doctor's note. I am not dead yet, I thought. And if I am going down tonight, I am going to bring the whole house down with me. The heavy metal gate of the garage rattled down behind the SUV, cutting off the last sliver of twilight. The sound echoed in the concrete space like the door of a prison cell slamming shut. I sat in the back seat for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, gathering every ounce of strength I had left. My hands were still trembling, not from age but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I was inside the beast's belly now. This house, which I had designed with my own hands 30 years ago, used to be a sanctuary of light and open spaces. Now the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch out like claws waiting to drag me into the dark. Lucas opened my door. He did not offer me a hand. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh through my jacket. "Come on, Dad. Let us get you inside. Megan is waiting." He pulled me out of the car with enough force to make me stumble. I let myself be heavy. I let my feet drag. I had to play the part. If they thought for even 1 second that I was lucid, that I knew about the note in my pocket, they would kill me right here on the oily concrete floor of the garage. I had to be the confused, frail old man they wanted me to be. We walked through the mudroom and into the kitchen. The house was freezing. They must have lowered the thermostat to keep me docile, or maybe the coldness was just radiating from the people who lived here. Megan was standing by the kitchen island. She was wearing her white pharmacist coat, something she usually only wore at work, but lately she had started wearing it around the house when she tended to me. It was a psychological trick. It was meant to make me feel like a patient in a hospital, stripped of my authority in my own home. On the marble countertop, laid out on a silver tray that used to belong to my mother, was a hypodermic needle. Next to it was a small vial of clear liquid. Megan smiled when she saw us. It was a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were flat and hard like polished stones. "Welcome home, Tom. You look terrible. Your color is all wrong." She picked up the syringe and tapped the side of it. A tiny droplet of liquid squirted out of the tip, catching the light of the chandelier. "Dr. Evans called ahead," she said. "He told us you were very agitated at the appointment. He suggested a mild sedative to help you sleep through the night. It is just a cocktail of vitamins and a muscle relaxant. It will help with the tremors." I stared at the needle. It wasn't vitamins. It was the final dose. Whatever was in that vial would stop my heart or paralyze my diaphragm. If that needle pierced my skin, I was a dead man. Lucas pushed me toward one of the high-backed bar stools. "Sit down, Dad. Make it easy on yourself." I sat, letting my shoulders slump. My mind was racing, calculating the distance between the stool, the tray, and Megan. I was an engineer. I dealt in physics and geometry. I needed an angle. "I don't want it," I mumbled, slurring my words on purpose. "I don't need medicine." Megan sighed. The sound of a parent tired of a toddler's tantrum. She walked around the island, the syringe held high. "We are not doing this tonight, Tom. You are dehydrated and you are confused. This will make you feel better. Hold his arm, Lucas." Lucas stepped in close, grabbing my left wrist and pinning it to the counter. His grip was iron. He was younger, stronger, and he enjoyed this. I could feel the malice radiating off him. Megan uncapped the needle. She stepped closer. I could smell her perfume, a floral scent that barely masked the smell of rubbing alcohol. "Just a little pinch," she whispered. "Now." I waited until she was inches away. Then I unleashed the chaos. I let out a guttural, choked sound, throwing my head back as if seized by a sudden convulsion. I kicked my legs out violently, my heavy boot catching the leg of the stool. I threw my free arm out in a wild, flailing arc. My hand connected with the silver tray. The sound was explosive. The tray flew off the counter, crashing onto the tile floor. The glass of water shattered, sending shards and liquid spraying everywhere. The vial rolled away under the cabinets. Megan shrieked and jumped back to avoid the glass. In her surprise, she dropped the syringe. It clattered onto the floor near my feet, sliding into the puddle of spilled water. "What the hell is he doing?" Lucas shouted, trying to wrestle my flailing body. "He is having a seizure." "Hold him down," Megan yelled. I thrashed harder, sliding off the stool and collapsing onto the floor, right on top of the mess I had made. The glass shards bit into my hands, but I didn't feel the pain. I only felt the cold plastic of the syringe barrel against my palm. While Lucas was trying to grab my shoulders and Megan was dancing around the broken glass, I curled my fingers around the syringe. In one fluid motion masked by my writhing, I slid the needle up the sleeve of my jacket. I pushed it deep, praying the plunger wouldn't depress and squirt the poison onto my skin. I let out one final long groan, my body shaking violently, and then I went limp. Dead weight. The kitchen went silent save for the hum of the refrigerator and the heavy breathing of my son and daughter-in-law. I lay there with my eyes closed, my face pressed against the cold, wet tile, clutching the stolen weapon inside my sleeve. "Is he dead?" Lucas asked. There was hope in his voice. Megan crouched down. I felt her fingers on my neck, checking for a pulse. Her fingernails were sharp. "No. His pulse is racing, but he is out cold. Probably a vasovagal syncope from the stress." She stood up. I heard the crunch of glass under her heels. "Damn it, Tom. Look at this mess." "Should we get another dose?" Lucas asked. "I can go to the safe in the study." I held my breath. This was the moment. If they went for another dose, I would have to fight them right here on the floor, and I would lose. Patricia walked into the room. I recognized the click of her heels. They were distinct, sharp, authoritative. She stopped near my head. I could smell the smoke of her slim cigarettes. "Leave it," Patricia said. Her voice was ice. "But he needs the sedative if we are going to stage the accident," Megan argued. "He needs to be groggy when he goes over the railing." Patricia let out a short, derisive laugh. "Look at him. He is a vegetable. He has pissed himself and passed out on the kitchen floor. He is not going to put up a fight." She kicked the toe of my boot, nudging my leg like I was a piece of roadkill. "Besides," Patricia continued, "we don't want too much of the sedative in his system during the autopsy. It might look suspicious if he was unconscious before he fell. We need it to look like a clumsy, senile accident. The fall will kill him. If it doesn't, the cold will finish him off before morning." I lay perfectly still, forcing my eyelids not to flutter. They were discussing my murder with the casual tone of people discussing what to order for dinner. "Just get him upstairs," Patricia commanded. "Put him in the master bedroom. Lock the door. We will do it at 2 a.m. when the neighbors' lights are all out." Lucas sighed. "Get his legs, Megan. He weighs a ton." I felt hands grab my ankles and my armpits. They lifted me up unceremoniously. My head lolled back. I kept my arm with the hidden syringe pressed tight against my side. They dragged me toward the stairs. My heels bumped against the steps, thud, thud, thud. It was humiliating. It was painful, but it was necessary. They hauled me down the hallway, past the family photos that were lies, past the rooms where I had raised a son who was now dragging me to my death. They entered my bedroom and swung me onto the bed. I landed hard on the mattress. Lucas checked my pockets. I stopped breathing. If he found the syringe or the note, it was over. He patted my pants pockets. He found my wallet. He took it out. "I will take his cards," Lucas said, "just in case." He didn't check the inside pocket of my jacket. He didn't check my sleeves. He underestimated me. He saw a broken old man, not a threat. "Let us go," Megan said. "This room smells like old people." They walked to the door. I heard the heavy click of the deadbolt sliding home. Then I heard the sound of a chair being wedged under the handle from the outside. I was locked in. I waited until their footsteps faded down the hall. I counted to 60. Then I opened my eyes. The room was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the curtains. I sat up slowly. I pulled the syringe out of my sleeve. The needle glinted in the moonlight. I looked at the clear liquid inside. Death in a tube. They thought I was helpless. They thought I was asleep. But I was awake. And for the first time in months, my mind was crystal clear. Patricia was right about one thing. Someone was going to die tonight. But she was wrong about who it would be. I swung my legs off the bed and moved toward the window. I had work to do. I woke up with a throbbing headache that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, a dull ache that felt less like a hangover and more like the after effects of something chemical. The room was bathed in the soft gray light of early morning, filtering through the heavy velvet curtains. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me, trying to piece together how I had gotten into bed. My memory was a fractured mosaic of dinner, a glass of wine that tasted slightly bitter, and then a sudden, overwhelming wave of exhaustion. I sat up the room, spinning slightly, and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. My mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. I needed water. I stood up on shaky legs and walked toward the bedroom door, reaching for the brass handle I had polished myself just last week. I turned it. It didn't move. I frowned, thinking maybe it was just stuck, maybe the humidity had swollen the wood. I gripped it tighter with both hands and twisted hard. Nothing. The mechanism was jammed, or rather it was locked. But that was impossible. This was my master bedroom. The lock was on the inside. Unless someone had engaged the deadbolt from the hallway using the emergency key. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in my chest. I pounded on the thick oak wood with my fist. Hello? Is anyone out there? The silence that answered me was absolute. It wasn't the quiet of an empty house. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a place that was holding its breath. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear footsteps, a voice, anything. Nothing. I backed away, my breathing coming in short, shallow gasps. I needed to think. I am an engineer. I solve problems for a living. I don't panic. I turned my attention to the large bay windows that overlooked the manicured lawn of the estate. If the door was compromised, the window was the logical exit. I hurried over, sweeping the curtains aside. The view was familiar. The garden I had planted, the driveway where my car should have been, but wasn't. I unlatched the lock on the window sash and tried to slide it up. It didn't budge. I pushed harder, putting my back into it, gritting my teeth. It was solid as a rock. I leaned in closer, my eyes scanning the frame, and that was when I saw them. Small, round heads of steel nails driven deep into the wood where the sash met the frame. They had been painted over with white enamel to blend in, but the paint was slightly fresher, slightly brighter than the rest. They had nailed the windows shut. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't a prank. This was premeditation. Someone had come into my room, likely while I was comatose from whatever they put in my drink, and meticulously sealed me in. I was a prisoner in the house I had built with my own money. I rushed to the bedside table, grabbing the landline phone. I lifted the receiver, desperate for the reassuring hum of a dial tone. Silence. Dead air. I followed the cord to the wall jack. It looked intact. I tugged on it, and it came loose effortlessly, the end frayed and cut. They had severed it. But I knew how this house was wired. I knew every circuit, every conduit, because I had designed them. I ran to the toolbox I kept in the bottom drawer of the wardrobe, a habit from my days working in the field. I grabbed a screwdriver and knelt by the electrical outlet near the nightstand, the one that also housed the internal telephone wiring. With trembling hands, I unscrewed the faceplate and pulled it away from the wall. I shined the small flashlight from my keychain into the dark crevice. My heart sank. The wires inside weren't just cut at the jack. They had been pulled taut and severed deep within the wall cavity. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They had disconnected the line from the main junction box in the basement. There was no way to patch this. I was completely cut off. I sat back on my heels, the room feeling suddenly smaller, the air thinner. I looked up at the corner of the ceiling where the smoke detector blinked with a steady red light. Beside it was the small, dark dome of the security camera I had installed for safety. Now it felt like an unblinking eye watching my desperation. They were probably watching me right now. My wife, my children. Watching the old man realize he was trapped in a gilded cage. I retreated into the bathroom, closing the door behind me. It was the only place in the master suite without a camera. I had insisted on that for privacy, a small mercy that now became my only advantage. I turned on the tap, letting the water run loud and hard to mask any sound. I stared at myself in the mirror. I looked old, scared, defeated. But then I remembered. Years ago, during a particularly paranoid phase when business competitors were trying to steal my patents, I had stashed emergency supplies in various places. I had forgotten about most of them, as life got comfortable as I let my guard down. But there was one. One I hadn't touched in a decade. I turned toward the toilet. It was an old-fashioned model with a heavy ceramic tank lid. I lifted it carefully, the porcelain heavy and cold in my hands, and set it down on the bath mat. I peered into the water. At first I saw nothing but the flushing mechanism, but then taped to the underside of the rim, submerged in the water but sealed inside a double layer of thick freezer bags, was a shape. I reached in the water, freezing against my skin, and peeled the tape away. I pulled out the package. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely undo the seal. Inside was a Nokia, a brick of a phone from another era, and a spare battery. I had put this here 10 years ago. Would it even work? Would the battery hold a charge after all this time sitting in a plastic bag? I popped the back open, inserted the battery, and held the power button. The screen remained black. Come on, please. I held it longer, my thumb turning white from the pressure. A flicker. Then the blue startup screen illuminated the dim bathroom. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I checked the top corner of the tiny pixelated screen. Battery critical. 12%. 12% to save my life. I watched the signal bars. Searching. Searching. 1 bar. 2 bars. It was enough. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I didn't know who controlled the local station, and if my family had gone to these lengths, they might have already spun a story about a senile, unstable old man to the authorities. I needed someone who fought for a living. I needed a shark. I dialed the number I had memorized 30 years ago, the number of the only man I trusted implicitly. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. 3. Pick up, Arthur. For God's sake, pick up. The line clicked. Hello. Arthur's voice was gruff, confused. It was early. Arthur, it's Tom. Don't hang up and don't ask questions. Just listen. Tom. You're calling from a number I don't recognize. I tried your cell all day yesterday. Your wife said you were sick, that you had a stroke or something, that you couldn't speak. They are lying, Arthur. I whispered, crouching in the corner of the bathroom away from the door. I didn't have a stroke. I am locked in the master bedroom. The windows are nailed shut. The lines are cut. They have trapped me, Arthur. They are trying to take everything. There was a silence on the other end, a silence that terrified me. If Arthur didn't believe me, if he thought I was having a mental episode like they claimed, I was done for. Tom, Arthur said slowly, his voice dropping an octave, becoming sharp and professional. Are you safe right now? I am in the bathroom. It is the only place they cannot see me. I have a burner phone with 12% battery. You need to listen to me very carefully, because I do not know how much time I have before they realize I am not in the bedroom. Tell me what to do, Tom. I took a deep breath, looking at the door, expecting it to burst open at any moment. I need you to get the file. The black file in my office safe. The one I told you about 5 years ago. The one labeled contingency. It has the proof of the offshore accounts, the real ownership deeds, everything. If they have me trapped here, it means they are making a move for the power of attorney. They want control of the company and the estate. I understand, Arthur said. I'm leaving my house now, so I'll get the file. Should I call the police? No police, I hissed. Not yet. They own the sheriff. If the police come here for a wellness check, my wife will show them a forged medical report, and they will leave me here to rot. You need to get a federal judge. You need an emergency injunction. You need to get me out of here legally before they can drug me again. Okay, Tom. I'm on it. Stay in the bathroom if you can. Stay safe. Do not eat or drink anything they give you. My phone beeped loudly. Battery low. 5%. Arthur. The phone is dying. I don't know if I can call you back. If I don't contact you by noon, assume they have come in. Assume the worst. Do not let them win, Arthur. Promise me. I promise Tom. I'm coming for you. Hang tight. The line went dead. The screen flickered once and went black. I stared at the dark reflection in the phone screen. I was alone again. But now the game had changed. They thought I was a helpless old man trapped in a room waiting to die or sign away my life. They didn't know I had just lit the fuse. I stood up, put the dead phone back in my pocket, and flushed the toilet to maintain the ruse. I walked back into the bedroom, moving slowly, pretending to be the broken man they wanted me to be. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped together to hide their trembling. I looked at the nailed windows, at the camera blinking in the corner. Let them watch. Let them think they have won. Because when the storm hits, they won't even see it coming. I closed my eyes and waited for the sound of the key in the lock. The silence on the other end of the line dragged on for a second too long, a second that felt like a lifetime. When Arthur finally spoke, his voice didn't carry the urgency I expected. It didn't have the sharp, commanding tone of the lawyer who had fought by my side in boardrooms for 30 years. Instead, it was soft. It was patronizing. It was the voice one uses when speaking to a frightened child or a confused invalid. Tom, listen to me very carefully, Arthur said, the sound of his voice making the tiny speaker in the old Nokia crackle. I need you to take a deep breath. You are sounding very agitated again. I just got off the phone with Patricia not 10 minutes ago. She is worried sick about you. My blood ran cold. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. Agitated. Again. The words were chosen with surgical precision. What are you talking about, Arthur? I whispered, my voice trembling, not with fear anymore, but with a dawning, horrific realization. I told you, she has locked me in. She has cut the lines. I am trapped. No, Tom. Arthur sighed, a sound of heavy, feigned patience. Patricia told me about the episodes you have been having. The paranoia. The way you started forgetting things at the office last month. She told me how you accused the gardener of stealing your watch only to find it on your own wrist. She is only trying to protect you, Tom. You are not locked in. You are in a safe environment. She had to secure the windows because you tried to climb out on the roof last Tuesday. Don't you remember? I stared at the tiled wall of the bathroom, my reflection in the mirror, staring back at me with wide, terrified eyes. I had never accused the gardener. I had never climbed on the roof. These were lies. Elaborate, constructed lies designed to paint a picture of a man losing his mind. But the worst part wasn't the lies themselves. It was who was telling them. Arthur, stop it, I hissed, gripping the phone tight enough to crack the plastic casing. I know what is happening. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the shell companies Patricia set up. You have the file, Arthur. The contingency file. Open it. Read the documents. There was a pause, and then Arthur chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound that stripped away the last 30 years of our friendship. The contingency file, Arthur repeated, his tone shifting, becoming colder, harder. Tom, there is no file. I shredded that file 3 days ago, just like I drafted the new power of attorney documents you signed last week. You remember signing them, don't you? You were a bit groggy, maybe a bit under the weather, but your signature is there. Clear as day. The room spun. I leaned back against the cold porcelain of the sink to keep from collapsing. I remembered a night last week. Patricia had brought me tea. She said I needed to sign some routine tax forms for the estate. I was tired. My vision was blurry. I trusted her. I trusted him. You, I choked out. You are in on it. It's not about being in on it, Tom. Arthur said, his voice now completely devoid of warmth. It is about pragmatism. You are getting old. You are losing your touch. The company needs new blood. Patricia and your son have a vision. And frankly, they made me an offer that ensures my retirement is far more comfortable than what your loyalty ever provided. You are going to a very nice facility, Tom. Patricia has already filed the papers for involuntary commitment. The ambulance is on its way. They will take good care of you. Just put the phone down, unlock the door, and accept it. It is over. The betrayal hit me harder than any physical blow could have. This was the man I went fishing with. The man who stood beside me at my father's funeral. The man who held my firstborn son before I even did. He wasn't just helping them. He was the architect. He had legalized my destruction. He had turned my life's work into a weapon against me. I realized then that if I stayed on the line, he would keep talking, just to keep me distracted. He was probably tracking the signal, or at the very least, waiting for me to give up. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to walk out of that bedroom, a broken, weeping old man, so the paramedics would see exactly what he described. A lunatic. An invalid. I will not sign, I said, my voice low and steady. I will not sign anything else. You won't have to, Tom, Arthur said. You already have. Goodbye, old friend. Try not to make a scene when they arrive. It's undignified. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a response. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the end call button. The screen went black. The connection was severed, and with it the last tie I had to the world outside. I stood there in the silence of the bathroom, the rushing water from the tap still masking the sound of my breathing. I was alone. Truly, completely alone. My wife was a wolf. My children were vultures. And my best friend was the snake in the grass. There was no cavalry coming over the hill. There was no judge to grant an injunction. There was only me, an old man in pajamas trapped in a house that had become a prison. I looked down at the Nokia phone. It was useless now. If I used it again, they might pinpoint exactly where I was hiding it. I popped the back open, took out the battery, and dropped the pieces into the toilet tank, burying them under the heavy ceramic lid. I couldn't let them find it. I couldn't let them know I knew. I walked back into the bedroom. The air felt heavy, suffocating. I checked the clock on the bedside table. It was only 9 in the morning. Arthur had said the ambulance was on its way. That meant I had minutes, maybe an hour at most, before men in white coats arrived with sedatives and restraint straps. Once they took me to that facility, once they medicated me, I would never be heard from again. I would fade away a drooling ghost in a sterile room while they spent my money and lived in my house. No. The word rose up in me like a roar. No. I would not let them win. I would not fade. I was Thomas Sterling. I built this empire from dirt and grit. I had survived recessions, lawsuits, and competitors who wanted me dead. I would not be taken down by the people I spoon-fed. I needed a way out. The door was a fortress. The windows were sealed shut with steel nails. I paced the room, my mind racing, analyzing every inch of the space with the desperate precision of an engineer. The floor was solid oak. The walls were reinforced plaster. There was no way to break through without tools I didn't have. Then I stopped. I looked up. High on the wall near the corner where the ceiling met the crown molding was a rectangular metal grate, the air conditioning vent. It was an old house, and when I renovated it 20 years ago, I had insisted on an industrial-grade HVAC system. The ducts were large, wide enough to carry a heavy airflow to cool the high ceilings, wide enough perhaps for a man. I stared at it. It was 10 feet off the ground. The grate was screwed in, and I was 70 years old. My joints ached in the rain. My back wasn't what it used to be. Climbing up there seemed impossible. It seemed insane. But the alternative was a needle in the arm and a padded room. I felt a surge of adrenaline, that ancient survival instinct that kicks in when a cornered animal realizes it has nothing left to lose. I didn't care about the pain. I didn't care about the risk of falling. I moved toward the heavy oak dresser that stood against the far wall. It was massive, filled with clothes I might never wear again. I pushed it. It groaned against the floorboards. I gritted my teeth and pushed harder, my shoulder digging into the wood, my feet slipping on the rug. Inch by inch, I moved it. I dragged the bedside table over and placed it on top of the dresser. It was a shaky, makeshift scaffold, a tower of desperation. I climbed. My knees popped. My breath came in ragged gasps. I stood on top of the dresser, then carefully, shakily stepped onto the nightstand. I wobbled my hand, shooting out to brace against the wall. I stabilized myself. I was high up now, face to face with the vent. I looked closely at the screws holding the grate in place. They were standard Phillips heads. I reached into my pocket where I still had the small screwdriver from the electrical outlet. My hand shook as I raised it. This was it. This was the only way. I wasn't just escaping a room. I was escaping a life that had been a lie. I started to turn the first screw. Rust and paint flaked away. It turned. They thought they had trapped a helpless old man. They were about to find out that they had trapped a monster who was just waking up. I would crawl through hell if I had to. And when I came out on the other side, there would be no mercy. None. The last screw came free with a sharp squeal of metal on metal that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for footsteps, waiting for the door to burst open. But nothing happened. The house remained silent. I carefully lowered the heavy metal grate, my arms trembling with the effort, and set it down on the top of the dresser. A cloud of ancient gray dust puffed out into my face, smelling of dry rot and time. I stared into the gaping black maw of the ventilation shaft. It was dark, uninviting, and terrifying. But behind me was a locked door and a destiny written by people who wanted me erased. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the edge of the drywall, hoisted my body up, and dragged myself into the darkness. The moment my knees hit the sheet metal of the duct, a jolt of pain shot up my legs. My arthritis, usually just a dull ache in the mornings, flared into a burning fire. I bit my lip so hard I tasted copper. I had to remind myself of the engineering. When I built this house 20 years ago, I had fought with the architects. They wanted standard narrow ducts. I insisted on oversized industrial conduits to maximize airflow efficiency and reduce noise. I told them it was about thermodynamics. Now, crawling on my belly like a soldier in a trench, I realized it was perhaps the only decision that matters. It was the decision that gave me a fighting chance. I crawled. It was a slow, agonizing shuffle. Left arm, right leg, right arm, left leg. The metal was cold and unforgiving. Every movement sent a hollow boom echoing softly down the tunnel, and I prayed the insulation I had paid extra for was doing its job of dampening the sound. The dust was everywhere. It coated my tongue, stung my eyes, and filled my nose with the scent of insulation and decay. It was pitch black, but I didn't need eyes to navigate. I knew the blueprints. I had drawn them. I knew that 30 feet ahead the main trunk line branched off toward the west wing. toward the dining room. I dragged my body forward inch by painful inch. My pajamas were tearing at the knees. My elbows were scraped raw. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold fury burning in my gut. I was a rat in my own walls scurrying through the dark while they walked freely in the light. After what felt like hours, but was likely only 20 minutes, I saw a faint grid of light ahead. It sliced through the darkness, illuminating the swirling dust motes. I stopped, my breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. I was directly above the formal dining room. I crept forward slowly, careful not to let my weight pop the metal sheeting. I positioned my face over the slats of the vent, looking down from the ceiling like a silent judge. The scene below made my stomach turn. They were there. All of them. My wife Patricia, my son Lucas, even his wife, the one who always smiled too brightly. They were sitting at my mahogany table, the one I had commissioned from Italy. And they were feasting. The smell of roasted meat wafted up, taunting my empty stomach. It was my steak. The dry-aged ribeyes I kept in the specialized freezer for special occasions. And in the center of the table sat a bottle of wine. I squinted. It was the 1982 Bordeaux, a $3,000 bottle I was saving for my golden anniversary. They had opened it like it was table wine. But it wasn't the theft of the food that froze my blood. It was the conversation. Lucas was leaning back in my chair, swirling the wine in his glass. He looked flushed, excited, not mournful. "Relax, Mom," Lucas said, his voice carrying clearly through the vent. "The ambulance is scheduled for 10. Arthur has the paperwork. By the time they get him to the facility and pump him full of Thorazine, he won't be able to tell Tuesday from a banana." Patricia cut a piece of steak with precise, elegant movements. "I just worry about the timing," she said. "The audit starts tomorrow morning. If he is still lucid, if he manages to make a phone call, he won't." Lucas interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. He sounded drunk. "Listen to me. We need this to happen tonight. The inspectors are coming to the Viaduct number 7 site on Monday." I held my breath. Viaduct number 7. It was the biggest contract my firm had ever landed. A massive infrastructure project connecting the two sides of the valley. I had stepped back from the daily operations 6 months ago, letting Lucas handle the project management to prove himself. "What about the viaduct?" Patricia asked, taking a sip of wine. Lucas laughed, a dark, ugly sound. "I saved us $4 million on concrete costs, Mom." I switched the supplier. "The mix is lighter. It's stable enough for now. But the stress tests, it won't pass. Not if they look closely. And they will look closely because cracks are already appearing in the support pylons." My hands gripped the metal of the vent so hard my knuckles turned white. He had compromised the structural integrity of a public bridge. He had used substandard materials to pocket the difference. People drove on that bridge. Families, school buses. If that comes out, Patricia said, her voice dropping, "You go to prison, Lucas, and the company assets get frozen. We lose everything." "That is why the old man has to go down," Lucas said, pointing his steak knife at the empty seat at the head of the table. "The narrative is already set." Arthur drafted the statement. "When the cracks are discovered next week, we blame it on the original engineering specs. We blame it on the chief engineer's declining mental state. We say Tom was losing his mind, that he made calculation errors, that he overruled the safety officers. I felt like I had been punched in the chest. They weren't just stealing my money. They weren't just locking me away. They were planning to pin a potential catastrophe on me. They were going to destroy my professional legacy, my name, my honor, to cover up Lucas's crime. If that bridge failed, people would die, and the world would blame the senile old man who died in a mental institution. I would go down in history as a negligent monster while Lucas played the grieving son who was trying to clean up his father's mess. It is brilliant, really." Lucas continued, shoving a piece of steak into his mouth. "He takes the fall for the bridge. He gets declared incompetent. We get the power of attorney. We settle the lawsuit with the city using his personal insurance, and we keep the $4 million I skimmed. It's a perfect circle. Patricia sighed, a sound of relief. As long as he doesn't talk. He is done talking, Lucas sneered. He is just a ghost now. I lay there in the dark, tears of rage, mixing with the dust on my face. A ghost. That is what they thought I was. A ghost in the machine. But they had forgotten one thing. Ghosts haunt. And I was about to become their worst nightmare. Suddenly a tickle started deep in my nose. The dust. The insulation fibers. It was unbearable. My diaphragm spasmed. I clamped my hand over my mouth and nose, my eyes watering, my chest heaving. A sneeze was coming. A loud explosive sneeze that would give away my position instantly. I held my breath until my lungs burned. I buried my face in the crook of my elbow, pressing hard, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Below me the conversation lulled. "Did you hear that?" Lucas asked, looking up at the ceiling. I froze. My heart stopped beating. The sneeze was still there, a ticking time bomb in my sinuses. I pressed my face into the metal, squeezing my eyes shut, willing my body to obey. "Probably just the house settling," Patricia said dismissively. "Or rats. You know how old this place is." "Rats," Lucas muttered, returning to his wine. "Yeah. Big fat rats." I let out the breath in a slow, silent hiss. The urge passed, but the clarity remained. I knew everything now. There was no going back. There was no reconciliation. This wasn't a family dispute. This was war. And I was currently unarmed, lying on my belly in a tin can, while my enemy sat below, sharpening their knives. I needed to keep moving. I needed to get to the garage. I needed a weapon. And I needed to stop Viaduct number 7 from becoming a graveyard with my name on the tombstone. I began to crawl again, slower this time, fueled by a hatred colder than the steel beneath me. The crawl toward the west wing took an eternity. My knees were bleeding now, the fabric of my pajamas worn through by the sharp edges of the galvanized steel, but the pain was distant, dull, and irrelevant. I was fueled by a cold, precise rage that sharpened my senses. I knew the layout of the ventilation system by heart, because I had drawn the schematics myself 30 years ago. I knew that the duct narrowed just before the executive suite, a design flaw I had argued against, but eventually conceded to accommodate the load-bearing beams. Now that flaw was my only path to salvation. I squeezed my shoulders through the tight passage, the metal pressing against my chest and back, exhaling all the air from my lungs to gain that extra inch of space. I reached the vent above the main office. This room had been my sanctuary for 3 decades before I handed the keys to Lucas. It was where I designed the skyline of this city. Now it was the command center for my destruction. I peered through the slats. The room was dark, illuminated only by the standby lights of the server rack in the corner and the faint glow of the street lamps filtering through the blinds. It was empty. I worked the screws loose with the same small tool, my fingers cramping, sweat stinging my eyes. The grate swung down, hanging by a single screw I had left to prevent a loud clang. The drop was higher here, 10 feet. For a man of 70 with arthritic knees, it was a suicide jump, but I didn't have a choice. I maneuvered my legs out first, hanging by my fingertips from the lip of the vent. My muscles screamed in protest. I took a breath, swung my body slightly to clear the desk, and let go. I hit the floor hard. The impact jarred my spine and sent a shockwave of agony up my legs, forcing a grunt from my throat that I barely stifled. I rolled instantly, absorbing the momentum, and lay flat on the Persian rug, listening. Silence. The thick mahogany doors and the soundproofing I had installed in the walls, ironically, to keep corporate secrets in, were now keeping my presence hidden. I pulled myself up, leaning heavily against the desk. I moved to the chair. Lucas's chair. My chair. The computer was asleep. I tapped the spacebar. The screens flared to life, washing the room in blue light. A password prompt appeared. A fingerprint scan. I stared at it. Lucas was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid enough to leave his machine unlocked. Most people would have given up there or tried to guess the password, wasting precious minutes. But I am not most people. I am an engineer. I know that a computer is just a machine, and every machine has a bypass if you understand how it is built. I didn't need to log into Windows. I didn't need his password. I just needed the data on the disk. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. It was locked, but I knew the trick. I reached underneath the drawer mechanism, pressed the hidden release latch I had installed years ago for my own security, and the drawer slid open. Lucas hadn't even changed the lock. Inside, buried under a pile of old blueprints, was my emergency kit. A small black pouch containing precision screwdrivers, a multimeter, and a portable SATA to USB docking station. I had used this kit for forensic audits on construction sites. I never thought I would use it on my own son. I knelt beneath the desk and pulled the tower casing forward. It was a high-end gaming rig Lucas insisted on using for CAD work. Flashy lights, glass side panel, easy access. I unscrewed the thumb screws and slid the glass panel off. Inside, the components hummed. I located the main hard drive, the boot drive, where the user data was stored. I pulled the SATA cable and the power connector. The computer screens above went black. I pressed the release tab and slid the drive out of the bay. My hands were steady now. This was work. This was technical. I placed the drive into my docking station and plugged the USB cable into the back of my own secure laptop, which I kept in the hidden wall safe behind the bookshelf. I spun the dial of the safe, left to 20, right to 10, left to 5. Click. The door swung open. My laptop was there, fully charged, disconnected from the company network. Air-gapped. Safe. I booted my machine and plugged in the dock. The drive spun up with a soft whir. My laptop recognized it as external mass storage. I didn't need a password to browse the file structure because I wasn't booting from it. I was just reading it like a giant flash drive. I navigated through the folders. Users, Lucas, documents. There it was. A folder named Project 7 Internal. My heart hammered against my ribs as I double-clicked. The list of files scrolled down the screen. I opened the first PDF. It was an invoice from a steel supplier in Eastern Europe. Grade C, reclaimed. My stomach turned. Viaduct number 7 was designed for Grade A virgin steel, capable of withstanding hurricane-force winds and seismic shifts. Grade C was scrap metal. It was brittle. It was cheap. And Lucas had bought tons of it. I opened the next file. An email thread. The subject line, Inspector Johnson, payment schedule. I read the text. Johnson, the cracks in Pylon 4 are cosmetic. The wire transfer of 50,000 hits your offshore account on Friday. Sign the safety certificate. It was all there. Bribery, fraud, gross negligence, conspiracy. They weren't just cutting corners. They were building a tomb. If that bridge collapsed during rush hour, hundreds of cars would plunge into the river. Thousands of lives. And they were going to let me take the fall for it. They were going to let the world think I was the one who signed off on this death trap. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the encrypted USB drive I always kept on my keychain. I plugged it in. I selected the entire folder. Copy. Paste. The progress bar appeared. 2 minutes remaining. 2 minutes. It felt like 2 years. I stared at the door, expecting the handle to turn at any second. I could hear the faint murmur of voices from the hallway now. They were finished with dinner. They were moving around. 1 minute remaining. I looked around the office. The framed photos on the wall were all of Lucas. Me shaking hands with the governor. Me cutting the ribbon on the hospital wing. They were trophies to him. Props to support the legitimacy of the empire he was rotting from the inside. 30 seconds. I prepared myself. Once this data was safe, I had the ammunition. I could go to the FBI. The local police were in Lucas's pocket. Sheriff Miller was at my barbecue last month laughing too hard at Lucas's jokes, but the feds were different. Interstate commerce, infrastructure fraud. This was federal jurisdiction. Transfer complete. I yanked the USB drive out and shoved it deep into my sock. I powered down my laptop and returned it to the safe, spinning the dial. I quickly unhooked the hard drive from the dock, slid it back into Lucas's computer tower, and reconnected the cables. I slid the glass panel back on. I wiped the desk where I had touched it with the sleeve of my pajamas. I stood up, the adrenaline fading into a cold, hard resolve. I had the smoking gun. But I was still trapped in the house. I couldn't go back up the vent. My arms were too weak to pull me up 10 feet. I had to go out the door. I had to move through the house past the family that wanted me dead and find a way into the night. I moved to the office door and pressed my ear against the wood. Footsteps. Heavy, confident footsteps. Lucas. He was coming down the hall. He was coming here. I looked around frantically. There was no closet, no balcony. The only hiding place was the narrow gap behind the heavy velvet curtains of the floor-to-ceiling window. I slipped behind the fabric just as the door handle turned. The latch clicked. The door swung open. Light from the hallway spilled into the room, cutting a sharp yellow rectangle across the floor where I had been standing 10 seconds ago. Lucas walked in. I could smell the expensive cognac on his breath from across the room. He didn't turn on the light. He walked straight to the desk, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. Then he picked up the phone on the desk. "Yeah," he said, his voice slurred but menacing. "Is the ambulance here yet? Ooh. Bring the restraints. He might be feisty. No, don't knock. Just come in the back. I want this done quiet." He hung up. He was 5 feet away from me. If he turned his head, if he saw the bulge in the curtain, it was over. I held my breath, my hand clutching the USB drive in my sock, ready to fight with the last ounce of strength I possessed. Lucas closed the door behind him, and the click of the latch echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. I stood frozen behind the heavy velvet curtains, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack the bone. I waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. I listened to his heavy footsteps retreating down the hallway, fading until they were swallowed by the ambient hum of the house. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, the air shuddering out of my lungs. I stepped out from the hiding spot, my legs trembling, not just from age but from the sheer terror of the close call. The room was bathed in the blue light of the computer screens I had just violated, casting long ghostly shadows across the floor. I looked up at the vent. It was 10 feet high, a black square in the ceiling that mocked me. There was no way I could drag the desk over and climb back up there without making a noise that would alert the entire house. My arms were shaking, my knees were throbbing with a deep, grinding ache, and my energy reserves were running on fumes. The vent was not an option. The only way out was the door. I had to risk the hallway. I had to sneak past the dining room, slip into the kitchen, and make a break for the service entrance in the garage. It was a suicide mission, but staying here was a death sentence. I took a step toward the door, my hand reaching for the brass knob. I was inches away when the handle turned. I didn't have time to hide. I didn't have time to think. The door swung open, and the light from the hallway flooded in again, blinding me for a split second. I froze, caught in the open like a deer in headlights, clutching the USB drive in my pocket, as if it were a talisman that could protect me. It wasn't Lucas. It was Megan. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway. She was wearing a shimmering red evening gown that hugged her figure, holding an empty wine decanter in one hand. She had come to refill the bottle from the private stock Lucas kept in the office minibar. She stopped. Her eyes went wide, but she didn't scream. She didn't gasp. She didn't drop the decanter. Instead, a slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It was a smile devoid of warmth, devoid of humanity. It was the smile of a predator that had just cornered a wounded animal. "Well, well, well," she purred, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet venom. "Look what we have here. The ghost has decided to walk among the living." "Megan," I said, my voice raspy and dry, "you don't know what they are doing. You don't know about the bridge." She laughed, a low, throaty sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Daddy Tom, you really are senile, aren't you? Who do you think introduced Lucas to the concrete supplier? Who do you think set up the shell companies to launder the savings? You think your son is smart enough to pull this off alone? He is the face, Tom. I am the brain." The realization hit me harder than a physical blow. She wasn't an accessory. She was the architect. She stepped into the room and kicked the door shut behind her with her heel. She set the crystal decanter down on the sidebar with a deliberate, gentle clink. Her eyes never left mine. She reached into the pocket of her dress, but instead of a phone, she pulled out a small, sleek silver object. She flicked her thumb, and the blade of a heavy-duty box cutter slid out with a sharp snap. It glinted in the blue light of the monitors. "You are supposed to be in bed, Tom," she said, walking slowly toward me, twirling the blade between her fingers. "You are supposed to be a confused, sick old man. But look at you, wandering around, stealing things. You are not being a good boy at all." "Megan, stop," I warned, backing away until my hips bumped against the edge of the heavy oak desk. "Put it down. We were going to do this the easy way," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The ambulance. The sedatives. A nice quiet room with a view of a brick wall. But you had to make it complicated. You had to snoop. Now I have to improvise. Self-defense, I think. The old man went crazy, attacked me in the office, and I had to protect myself. It is a tragedy, really." She lunged. She moved faster than I expected, slashing the blade through the air in a vicious arc. I threw myself backward, losing my balance and falling onto the leather office chair. The blade missed my throat by inches, slicing through the lapel of my pajama top. I felt the wind of the motion against my neck. She didn't stop. She raised the cutter again, her face twisted into a mask of pure, concentrated rage. I scrambled back, kicking the chair away. It rolled into her, buying me a fraction of a second. She stumbled but regained her footing instantly. I was cornered against the side table. On it sat the antique banker's lamp I had bought in London 40 years ago. It was solid brass, heavy with a green glass shade. It was the only thing within reach. As she stepped forward to finish me, I grabbed the base of the lamp with both hands. I didn't try to swing it like a club. I was too weak, and she was too fast. Instead, I ripped it from the table. The cord was still plugged into the floor outlet behind the desk. "Die, you miserable old wretch," she hissed, raising the blade for a downward stab. I threw the lamp, not at her, but past her toward the left. The heavy brass base flew through the air, pulling the thick electrical cord taut across her path just as she lunged forward. It worked. Her shin caught the wire. Her momentum betrayed her. Her feet flew out from under her, and she pitched forward with a startled gasp. She hit the edge of the mahogany desk with a sickening thud, her head cracking against the solid wood before she crumpled to the floor. The box cutter skittered across the rug and slid under the sofa. Silence descended on the room. Megan lay motionless in a heap of red silk and dark intentions. I stood there, panting, my chest heaving, clutching the side of the desk to keep from collapsing. I looked at her. She was breathing, but she was out. I had bought myself time, but at a terrible cost. The crash of the lamp and the thud of her body had not gone unnoticed. "What was that?" a voice boomed from downstairs. It was Lucas. Megan, Patricia called out, her voice shrill with panic. "Megan, are you okay?" I heard the heavy pounding of footsteps on the stairs. They were coming. They were running. I looked at the door. It was unlocked. If they burst in now, if they saw Megan unconscious and me standing there, they wouldn't wait for the police. They would kill me right here and claim I did it. They would beat me to death and say I was raving mad. I pushed myself off the desk, my adrenaline overriding the agony in my joints. I limped as fast as I could toward the door. The footsteps were in the hallway now. "Megan, answer me." Lucas yelled closer now. I reached the door just as the handle started to turn. I grabbed the deadbolt, a heavy brass mechanism I had installed for privacy years ago, and slammed it home. Click. The handle stopped halfway. A second later, a heavy body slammed into the wood from the other side, shaking the frame. "Open the door," Lucas roared, pounding on the panels with his fist. "Open this door right now!" "Dad," Patricia screamed, and I could hear the terror in her voice, terror not for me, but for what I might have done to their plan. "Dad, if you hurt her, I swear to God." I backed away from the door, my breathing ragged. I was trapped again. But this time was different. I wasn't locked in by them. I had locked them out. I looked around the room. The vent was too high. The door was under siege. The window led to a 2-story drop onto concrete. I was a rat in a cage, and the cats were scratching at the only exit. I looked at Megan's unconscious body, then at the computer, then at the door that was shuddering under Lucas's blows. I had the evidence in my pocket. I had the truth. But truth doesn't matter if you are dead. I needed a weapon. I needed a plan. And I needed to survive the next 10 minutes. I moved to the middle of the room, scanning for anything at all. My eyes landed on the heavy iron fire poker hanging by the decorative fireplace. I walked over and grabbed it. The metal was cold and heavy in my hand. "I am not opening this door, Lucas," I shouted, my voice surprisingly strong, echoing off the walls of the room I had built. "If you come in, bring a gun, because I am done playing the victim." The pounding stopped for a moment. They were regrouping. They were whispering. I gripped the iron poker tighter, my knuckles white. The siege had begun, and only one of us was walking out of this room alive. The first blow of the axe splintered the wood near the lock, sending shards of mahogany flying across the room like shrapnel. I flinched, backing away until my legs hit the low sill of the window. The sound was deafening, a brutal, rhythmic thud that shook the very foundations of the room. Through the jagged hole in the door, I saw the gleam of the red metal blade, and behind it, the wild, unhinged eyes of my son. He wasn't just trying to open the door, he was trying to hack his way through to kill me. The fire axe must have been taken from the emergency case in the hallway, a safety measure I had installed to protect my family, now turned into a weapon to destroy the patriarch. I looked at the door, then at the window. The door would hold for maybe another minute. The solid oak was thick, but Lucas was fueled by a manic strength and the desperation of a man who knows his life of luxury is about to end. I turned to the window. It was floor-to-ceiling, double-paned, tempered glass, designed to withstand storms. I couldn't open it. The latches were fused with the same white paint I had seen in the bedroom. They had sealed the entire house. I grabbed the heavy leather armchair I had been sitting in earlier. It weighed a ton, but terror gave me a surge of hysterical strength. I dragged it back a few feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps, then hurled it with everything I had against the center of the glass. The chair bounced off with a dull thud, leaving only a spiderweb fracture. "Open the door, old man," Lucas roared from the hallway, his voice cracking. "Don't make this messy." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I grabbed the chair again, screaming with the effort, and slammed it into the fracture. This time the glass gave way. It exploded outward in a shower of glittering diamonds raining down into the darkness below. A blast of cold night air rushed into the room, carrying the scent of rain and cut grass. I stepped to the edge, crunching over the broken glass in my slippers. I looked down. It was a 20-foot drop. Directly below was the stone patio. To the left, about 5 feet out, was the swimming pool. The water looked black and deep, rippling gently in the breeze. I was 70 years old. I had bad knees and a bad back. Jumping from a second-story window was madness. It was suicide. But behind me, the door frame cracked loudly, and the head of the axe punched through, creating a hole big enough for a hand to reach in. I didn't think. If I thought about it, I would freeze. I climbed onto the ledge, feeling the wind whip at my pajamas. I aimed for the black water. I pushed off. For a second, I was flying. The air rushed past my ears, silencing the sound of the axe. I saw the moon reflected in the water. Then gravity took hold. I flailed, trying to keep my feet down, trying to stay vertical. I hit the water hard. It wasn't the graceful dive of an athlete. I entered at an awkward angle. My left side slammed into the surface tension like it was concrete. The cold water punched the air out of my lungs. I sank like a stone, the darkness swallowing me whole. But the impact had a price. A sharp, sickening pop echoed through my body, followed by a wave of white-hot agony that nearly made me pass out underwater. My left shoulder, it was out, dislocated. I screamed, a stream of bubbles rushing to the surface, but the sound was drowned by the water. I kicked my legs, desperate to get air. My left arm hung uselessly at my side, a dead weight dragging me down. I clawed at the water with my right hand, kicking, struggling, fighting the urge to inhale the fluid. I broke the surface, gasping, choking, spitting out chlorinated water. The pain was blinding. It radiated from my shoulder up to my neck and down to my fingertips, a throbbing, grinding torture that made my vision blur. I treaded water with one arm turning in a clumsy circle. I looked up at the window. The light from the office spilled out, cutting a yellow cone in the night. Lucas was there. He was leaning out the broken window, looking down. He couldn't see me in the shadows of the pool, not yet. I had to move. I swam to the edge, using a side stroke that sent fresh spikes of pain through my body with every kick. I reached the ladder with my good hand and hauled myself up. Gravity returned with a vengeance. My wet clothes felt like lead armor. I collapsed onto the cold pool deck, shivering violently, clutching my useless left arm to my chest. I couldn't stay here. He would come down. He would finish the job. The garage. It was my only hope. It was a detached building about 50 yards from the main house. My vintage Jaguar was in there. It had an old-fashioned ignition, no computer chips to track, and I kept a spare key in a magnetic box under the wheel well. If I could get to the car, I could crash through the garage door and get to the highway. I forced myself up. I stumbled across the lawn, my slippers squelching in the wet grass. Every step jarred my shoulder, making me grit my teeth so hard I thought they would crack. I stayed in the shadows of the hedges, avoiding the motion sensor lights I had installed along the path. The house loomed behind me, a glowing monster in the night. I reached the garage side door. It was locked. I cursed silently. I fished in my pocket with my trembling right hand. The USB drive was still there, safe in my sock. But no keys. I looked around. A landscaping rock. I picked it up and smashed the small window pane of the door. I reached in, unlocking the deadbolt. My arm was screaming, but I ignored it. I was running on pure survival instinct now. I slipped inside. The garage was dark, smelling of oil and gasoline. I fumbled for the light switch. The fluorescent tubes flickered to life, buzzing angrily. I stopped dead in my tracks. The Jaguar was there. My beautiful British racing green E-Type. But it was sitting on cinder blocks. All four wheels were gone. The tires were stacked neatly in the corner, slashed to ribbons. I looked at the SUV next to it. The hood was up. The engine block had been stripped of its battery and spark plug wires. They had thought of everything. They knew I might try to run. They had grounded me. A wave of despair washed over me, so powerful, it almost brought me to my knees. I was trapped. I was injured. I was alone. I leaned against the cold metal of the Jaguar, my forehead resting on the roof, tears of pain and frustration stinging my eyes. Then I heard the sound, a slow, rhythmic clapping. I turned around. Through the open garage door, I could see the main house. On the second-floor balcony overlooking the driveway stood Lucas. He was bathed in the exterior floodlights, looking like a king surveying his kingdom. In his hands, he held my hunting rifle, the Winchester 308 I used for deer season. He wasn't aiming it yet. He was holding it casually across his chest. "Did you really think I'd leave you a getaway car, Dad?" He shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet night. He sounded amused, excited. I stepped out of the garage into the driveway, my good hand raised to shield my eyes from the glare. "Lucas," I yelled, "put the gun down. It's over. I have the files. The FBI will know everything." Lucas laughed. A loud barking sound. "The FBI? You think you're going to make it to the FBI? Dad, look at you. You're a wet, shivering old man with a broken wing. You're trespassing on private property, and I have the right to defend my home against intruders." He raised the rifle. He shouldered it, looking through the scope. The barrel pointed straight at my chest. I froze. There was no cover. The driveway was a wide open killing field. But he didn't fire. Instead, he lowered the barrel slightly, aiming at the ground near my feet. "Running is good for the heart, Dad." He called out, a cruel smile visible even from this distance. "I'll give you a 10-second head start. Make it interesting for me. I haven't been hunting in years." He racked the bolt loading a round into the chamber. The metallic clack was the loudest sound in the world. One he counted. I stared at him. He was insane. He had snapped. The pressure, the greed, the fear of prison had turned my son into a psychopath. 2. I didn't wait for 3. I turned and ran. I ran toward the tree line at the edge of the estate. I ran despite the agony in my shoulder. I ran into the darkness, knowing that behind me my own flesh and blood was tracking me through a crosshair, waiting for the perfect moment to pull the trigger. "Run, Rabbit! Run!" His voice drifted on the wind, followed by the deafening crack of a gunshot. A dirt clod exploded near my heel, spraying mud onto my leg. He missed on purpose. He was hurting me. He was driving me into the woods, and the hunt had just begun. The mud sucked at my slippers with every step, threatening to pull them off my feet as I sprinted toward the dark tree line. My breath tore at my throat like sandpaper, and my left arm flopped uselessly against my side, sending white-hot bolts of agony into my neck with every jarred movement. I heard the crack of the rifle again. A branch just above my head exploded, raining splinters down into my hair. He was toying with me. He was a young man full of adrenaline and liquor, and I was a broken old machine running on fumes. I would never make it to the woods. And even if I did, the woods were 5 miles deep. I would die of exposure, or he would track me down with thermal optics. I skidded to a halt behind a large stone fountain, my chest heaving. I was thinking like a victim. I was thinking like the rabbit he called me. But I wasn't a rabbit. I was the architect of this entire estate. I knew every brick, every beam, every hidden conduit. And I remembered the argument I had with Patricia 15 years ago. She had screamed at me for spending $50,000 on the wine cellar renovation. She called it a vanity project. She said I was paranoid when I insisted on reinforcing the foundation and installing a separate ventilation system. She didn't know the half of it. I hadn't just built a wine cellar. I had grown up during the Cold War, and that fear never really leaves you. I had built a bunker. I looked back at the house. The garage was to my right. The entrance to the cellar was an external storm door tucked away behind the hydrangea bushes on the east wing. It was closer than the woods, but I had to cross the open lawn to get there. I took a deep breath. I waited for the rhythm of Lucas's taunts. "Come on, Dad," he shouted from the balcony. "Don't be boring. Run!" I broke cover. I didn't run away from the house. I ran parallel to it, diving toward the shadow of the east wing. The rifle cracked. A bullet kicked up turf 3 feet behind me. I heard Lucas curse. He realized I wasn't playing his game anymore. I heard the heavy thud of him jumping from the low balcony to the driveway. He was coming. I crashed through the hydrangea bushes, the branches whipping my face. There it was, the slant doors of the cellar. I fell to my knees, fumbling with the handle. It was rusted. It hadn't been opened from the outside in years. "Please," I whispered, gritting my teeth. "Please." I yanked with my good arm. The metal groaned but held fast. I could hear Lucas running on the gravel driveway. He was fast. He would be here in seconds. I jammed my fingers under the lip of the door and pulled with my entire body weight, screaming as the effort torqued my dislocated shoulder. The rust gave way with a screech of tearing metal. The door flew open. I threw myself into the black void of the stairwell, tumbling down the concrete steps. I hit the bottom landing hard, rolling onto my back. Above me, the rectangle of the night sky was suddenly blocked by a silhouette. Lucas stood at the top of the stairs, the rifle raised. "Goodbye, Dad," he panted. I kicked the internal door shut. It looked like a standard heavy oak door, the kind you find in any wine cellar. Lucas fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet punched through the wood. But then it hit what was underneath. A distinct metallic clang rang out like a church bell. The bullet flattened against the 10 centimeters of hardened steel plating I had sandwiched between the oak panels. I scrambled to the wheel lock mechanism on the wall. I spun it. Heavy steel deadbolts the size of my forearm slammed into the concrete frame with a thud that vibrated through the floor. I was safe. I collapsed against the cold concrete floor, sliding down until I was sitting in the dark. I could hear Lucas outside screaming inarticulately, smashing the butt of the rifle against the steel door. He could pound on it all night. He could drive a tank into it. That door was rated to withstand a direct hit from a grenade launcher. I fumbled in the darkness for the switch on the wall. A bank of red emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in a crimson glow. The room was lined with dusty wine bottles, hundreds of thousands of dollars of vintage Bordeaux and Pinot Noir. But behind the racks on the far wall was a metal panel. I walked over, dragging my feet, and punched in a code on the keypad. 1982. The year I started the company. The panel slid open, revealing my true legacy. It wasn't money, it was preparation. Inside was a bank of high-definition monitors linked to hidden pinhole cameras all over the property. There was a medical kit. There were rations. And sitting in a cradle was a satellite phone, a heavy rugged device connected to a dedicated dish concealed in the chimney. It was independent of the house lines, independent of the cell towers. It was my voice to the outside world. But first I had to fix myself. I couldn't make a call. I couldn't think. The pain in my shoulder was a white noise that drowned out everything else. I looked at the medical kit. I took out a roll of heavy gauze and a bite stick. I walked to the steel shelving unit that held the wine. I took a swig from a bottle of brandy, smashing the neck against the shelf to open it. The alcohol burned my throat, but it dulled the edge of the panic. I wedged the bite stick between my teeth. I positioned my useless left arm, hooking my wrist through the metal bracing of the shelf. I had to do this. I was an engineer. It was just a mechanical linkage that had slipped out of its socket. It needed torque and leverage to reset. I closed my eyes. I counted to 3. I threw my body weight back and rotated my torso. The crack was sickening. The pain was absolute. It felt like a lightning bolt had struck the center of my chest. I screamed around this bite stick, my vision going black for a second. I hung there panting, sweating, shaking uncontrollably. But when the wave of nausea passed, I felt the humerus settle back into the glenoid cavity. The sharp agony was replaced by a dull, heavy throb. It was done. I bound my arm to my chest with the gauze, making a makeshift sling. I took another drink of the brandy. Then I turned to the monitors. The screen labeled Driveway Cam 2 showed the front of the house. Lucas was pacing back and forth, still holding the rifle. He was on his cell phone, gesturing wildly. He looked scared. Good. But then headlights swept across the lawn. A vehicle was approaching. My heart leaped. Had the neighbors heard the shots? Was it the police? The vehicle pulled into the driveway. It wasn't a patrol car. It was a black Mercedes Sprinter van with tinted windows and no license plates. It stopped right in front of the garage. The side door slid open. 3 men stepped out. They were huge, wearing tactical black clothing and balaclavas. They didn't move like police. They moved with the terrifying efficiency of predators. They went to the back of the van and opened the doors. They didn't pull out stretchers. They didn't pull out negotiation megaphones. They pulled out heavy cases. One of them lifted a massive industrial tool. Even on the grainy monitor, I recognized it instantly. It was a diamond-tipped core drill used for boring through reinforced concrete foundations on construction sites. They weren't here to negotiate. They were the cleanup crew. Lucas hadn't called the police. He had called his partners, the ones who helped him launder the money, the ones who couldn't afford a witness. I looked at the steel door of my panic room. It could stop a bullet. It could stop a fire. But against a diamond core drill and 3 men who knew structural engineering, it was just a matter of time. I picked up the satellite phone. My hand was steady now. The game had changed. I wasn't fighting my son anymore. I was fighting a death squad. I extended the antenna and waited for the signal. 1 bar, 2 bars. I dialed. Not Arthur, not the local police. I dialed the number of the FBI field office in Chicago. I had the evidence in my pocket, and I had maybe 20 minutes before they drilled through my tomb. The first vibration was subtle, barely a tremor in the concrete floor beneath me, but within seconds, it grew into a low, grinding hum that rattled the wine bottles in their racks. The sound of a diamond-tipped core drill biting into reinforced concrete is not something you hear. It is something you feel in your teeth and in your bones. On the security monitor, I watched as the 3 men worked with terrifying precision. They had mounted the drill rig directly to the steel frame of my sanctuary door. Water from a cooling hose sprayed over the bit, turning the concrete dust into a gray slurry that ran down the steps like blood. They were cutting the lockout. It would take them time, perhaps 15 minutes, perhaps 30, depending on the grade of steel I had used, but they would get in. I sat on the cold floor, clutching the satellite phone to my chest with my good hand. My dislocated shoulder throbbed with a dull, sickening rhythm that matched the grinding of the drill. I checked the signal strength again. 2 bars. It was enough. I dialed the number for Rusty. Rusty was a man I hadn't seen in 10 years, a former private investigator who drank too much whiskey and knew too many secrets. He was the only man I knew who could navigate the gray areas between the law and the necessary. He picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy and thick with sleep. "Rusty, it is Tom Sterling. Do not hang up." "Tom, it is 3 in the morning. You better be dying or buying." "I am dying, Rusty. I am in the panic room. My son has hired a cleanup crew. They are drilling through the door. I need the cavalry." The line went silent for a heartbeat. Then the sleep vanished from Rusty's voice, replaced by a sharp alertness. "Where is the local PD, Tom?" "Compromised. Lucas owns them. I called the Chicago field office of the FBI, but I am just a voice on a phone to them. They need verification. They need to know this is real. You still have contacts in the bureau, don't you?" "Yeah, I do. Are you safe right now? I have maybe 20 minutes before they breach." "Hang tight, Tom. I am calling Agent Miller. He owes me a life. I will get a tactical team rolled out from the city, but 20 minutes is tight. You have to buy time. Do not let them in." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my hand shaking. 20 minutes. It sounded like such a short amount of time in a normal life. 20 minutes to drink a coffee. 20 minutes to read a newspaper. But in a steel box with 3 killers at the door, 20 minutes was an eternity. Suddenly, the grinding noise stopped. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and suffocating. I looked at the monitor. The men were not reloading the drill. They were stepping back. Had they given up? No. They were talking to Lucas. My son was standing at the top of the stairs, gesturing wildly. He handed one of the men a red tank, a propane tank taken from the large barbecue grill on the patio. My stomach turned. I knew exactly what they were planning. They realized the drill was too slow. They realized that a bunker is only safe as long as the environment inside is survivable. I heard a click from the ceiling. The gentle whir of the ventilation fan died. They had found the external intake vents concealed in the fake rocks by the garden and severed the power. The air in the room suddenly felt still and dead. Then came the hiss, a soft sibilant sound coming from the intake vent near the floor. I smelled it immediately. The rotten egg stench of mercaptan, the chemical added to propane to warn of leaks. But this wasn't a leak. This was an extermination. Propane is heavier than air. It would sink to the floor, filling the room from the bottom up, displacing the oxygen. If I didn't suffocate, the gas would eventually reach a concentration where a single spark would turn this concrete room into a bomb. Lucas was trying to smoke me out. He was pumping gas into a sealed chamber. "Dad, I know you are in there." Lucas's voice came through the thick steel, muffled but audible. "It is getting a little stuffy, isn't it? Just open the door. We can talk. I don't want you to suffer." I didn't answer. I didn't waste my breath. I scrambled to the metal cabinet in the corner, my movements clumsy and desperate. I yanked the door open. Inside, sitting on the top shelf in a sealed vacuum bag, was my M40 field protective mask. I had bought it years ago during the anthrax scares, a paranoid purchase that Patricia had mocked for months. She called me a doomsday prepper. She called me crazy. God bless crazy. I tore the bag open. I pulled the straps over my head, wincing as the movement pulled at my injured shoulder. I tightened the seals against my face, ensuring an airtight fit. I took a sharp breath. The air tasted like rubber and charcoal, but it was clean. The filter was working. I sat back against the wall, breathing heavily, the sound of my own respiration loud and raspy inside the mask. I was safe from the gas for now, but I was blind to the smell. I wouldn't know when the room was saturated. I wouldn't know when the mix was volatile. I looked at the monitor again. The men outside were laughing. They thought it was over. They thought I was clawing at my throat on the floor. They were waiting for the silence. I felt a surge of cold anger cut through the pain and the fear. I was not going to die like a rat in a trap. I was not going to wait for the FBI to find my corpse. I was an engineer. I built this house. I built this room. And I knew something they didn't. When I designed the panic room, I didn't just make it a shelter. I made it the heart of the estate's electrical system. The main breaker panel for the entire east wing and the underground subsystems was located right here on the south wall. I had done it so that in the event of a blackout, I could manually switch the house to the backup generators without leaving safety. I looked at the gray metal panel. A plan began to form in my mind. A dangerous, reckless plan. The door was steel. The frame was steel. The drill rig bolted to the door was steel. And the men operating it were holding on to that metal. I stood up, swaying slightly from the adrenaline. I walked to the breaker box and threw the latch. The panel swung open, revealing the rows of black switches and the thick, heavy-gauge copper cables that fed power to the house. I located the main input feed, 200 amps of raw power coming directly from the grid. Enough current to stop a heart. Enough current to fry a system. I reached into the toolkit on the shelf and pulled out a pair of insulated wire strippers. My hands were trembling, but my mind was clear. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was weaponizing my prison. I looked at the heavy bolts that secured the door frame from the inside. They went all the way through to the exterior plating. Metal touching metal. A perfect circuit waiting to be closed. I reached for the thick black cable that carried the live load. I was about to violate every safety code I had ever written. I was about to turn the door of my panic room into a giant electrified fence. If the FBI was 20 minutes away, I needed to make sure that for the next 20 minutes, nobody touched that door without paying a price. I gripped the cable cutter. I took a deep breath of the filtered air. "You want to play with power, Lucas?" I whispered inside my mask. "Let me show you what real power looks like." I clamped the cutters onto the insulation of the live wire. One cut. That was all it would take to expose the copper. One connection to the door bolt. And then anyone who touched that handle, anyone who leaned on that drill, would become part of the circuit. I squeezed the handle. The rubber insulation sliced open. I saw the glint of raw copper. I looked at the monitor one last time. The lad mercenary was reaching for the drill handle, ready to start boring again. Not today. I grabbed the exposed wire with my insulated pliers and moved toward the door. The gas hissed around my ankles, a silent, invisible ocean of death. But in my hand I held the lightning, and I was ready to strike. The tip of the diamond drill bit broke through the inner layer of steel with a shriek that sounded like a dying animal. Sparks showered down onto the concrete floor, illuminating the dark cellar in brief, violent bursts. I watched the metal turning red-hot around the breach, and I knew I had less than 2 minutes. The lock was gone. They were just cutting away the final hinges, now preparing to kick the door down and end the life of the man who built their fortune. I stood up, my legs trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that was coursing through my veins like ice water. I looked at the breaker panel. I had stripped the main 200-amp feed, the thick black cable that pulsed with the heartbeat of the grid. But a wire alone was not enough. I needed a medium. I needed a trap that they wouldn't see until it was too late. I moved to the corner where the emergency fire suppression valve was located. It was a manual system designed to flood the floor in case a fire threatened the vintage collection. I gripped the red wheel with my good hand. My shoulder throbbed, a dull, heavy ache that reminded me I was mortal, but I shoved the pain into a box in my mind and locked it tight. I spun the wheel. Water gushed out of the spigot at the base of the wall. It wasn't a sprinkle. It was a torrent. Cold, clear water poured onto the concrete, swirling around my feet, mixing with the gray slurry of drill dust. I watched it spread. It flowed across the uneven floor, seeking the lowest point, which was exactly where I knew it would be. The doorway. I stepped back, retreating to the rubber safety mat in front of the electrical panel. I was an engineer. I knew the rules of conductivity. I was standing on rubber. They were standing on wet concrete. I took the exposed copper end of the live cable. It was heavy, thick as my thumb. I didn't have time to be delicate. I threw the cable toward the door. The copper end splashed into the widening pool of water just inches from the steel threshold. It snaked through the liquid, a sleeping viper waiting to be woken up. I put my hand on the main throw switch of the panel. This wasn't a standard breaker. This was an industrial disconnect. When I threw this lever, it wouldn't just trip if there was a surge. It would hold. It would pump 240 volts of raw, unadulterated current into that water until the wires melted, or until the grid failed. "Open the door," I heard Lucas scream from the other side, his voice muffled by the steel but clear in its hysteria. "Get in there and drag him out." The drilling stopped. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of rushing water and my own ragged breathing inside the gas mask. Then came the impact. A boot hit the door. The steel groaned. Another kick. The weakened hinges screamed. I gripped the rubber handle of the switch, my knuckles white. I whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for steady hands. I was about to do something that could never be undone. The door flew open with a crash that shook the walls. For a second time seemed to freeze. The heavy steel slab swung inward, banging against the wine racks. The red emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows. In the doorway stood a giant of a man clad in black tactical gear. He wore a gas mask, his face an insect-like visage of glass and rubber. He held a stun baton in his hand, ready to subdue a helpless old man. He took a step. His heavy combat boots splashed into the water. He didn't look down. He looked at me, his eyes fixed on his target. He took another step, bringing his second foot into the pool. He was fully committed. He was standing in the trap. Now. I slammed the lever up. The sound was instantaneous. It wasn't a spark. It was a crack of thunder that exploded in the confined space. The water on the floor hissed and bubbled violently. The lights in the room flared blindingly bright, and then shattered, raining glass down on the racks. The man in the doorway didn't scream. He couldn't. His muscles seized instantly, locking him in a rigid, grotesque statue of agony. The stun baton flew from his hand, clattering uselessly against the wall. His body arched backward, every tendon snapping tight, as the current ravaged his nervous system. I watched in horror and fascination as the power of the grid flowed through him, finding the path of least resistance to the ground. Smoke began to rise from his boots. It lasted 3 seconds. It felt like 3 years. The main fuse in the panel blew with a deafening pop, plunging the room into darkness save for the faint light spilling in from the hallway. The man collapsed. He fell forward into the water with a heavy wet splash and lay still, twitching rhythmically. I stood there, my hand still gripping the dead lever. The smell of ozone and burnt insulation filled the air, mixing with the propane. Then I saw him. Lucas was standing just behind the fallen mercenary. He had been shielded by the man's body. He stared down at the smoking heap of what used to be his hired muscle, and then he looked up at me. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror that bordered on madness. He realized in that moment that I wasn't playing a game. He realized that the father who had paid for his college, who had bought him his cars, who had given him everything, was capable of killing him. He raised the rifle. His hands were shaking so badly the barrel wavered in the air. "You," he stammered, his voice a high-pitched squeak. "You killed him. You're a monster." I stepped away from the panel, my back pressing against the cold wine racks. "I am what you made me, Lucas," I said, my voice flat inside the mask. "Shoot him!" A voice shrieked from the darkness of the stairwell. It was Patricia. She pushed past Lucas, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hate. She didn't look at the dead man. She looked only at me. "Shoot him, Lucas!" she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "Shoot his skull off before he ruins everything. Do it now." Lucas steadied the rifle. He looked at his mother, then he looked at me. The fear in his eyes hardened into resolve. He was going to do it. He was going to pull the trigger. I closed my eyes. I had fought. I had survived the poison, the fall, the hunt. But I couldn't stop a bullet. Then the world exploded. A deep, rhythmic thumping sound vibrated through the ceiling, growing louder with every second until it drowned out Patricia's screaming. The wine bottles rattled in their racks. Dust fell from the concrete beams. Choppers. Suddenly, the reinforced skylight high above the cellar, the one I had installed to let in natural light during the day, shattered inward. A massive block of glass and metal crashed to the floor between me and Lucas. Before I could process what was happening, a small dark object dropped through the broken window. It hit the floor and rolled. Flashbang, I thought, turning my head away, instinctively burying my face in my arm. Boom! The concussion was like a physical punch to the gut. A blinding white light seared through my eyelids, followed by a ringing silence that erased all other sound. I fell to my knees, disoriented, the world spinning. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the sound of ropes zipping. Heavy boots hit the floor. 1, 2, 4. "Federal agents!" A voice roared, cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" I cracked my eyes open. Red laser dots danced in the smoke-filled room. 4 men in full FBI tactical gear had rappelled down into the cellar. Their weapons were trained on Lucas. Lucas stood there, frozen, the rifle still half raised. He looked at the agents, then he looked at the dead mercenary at his feet. The gun slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. "Get on the ground!" the agent screamed, advancing on him. Lucas dropped to his knees, putting his hands on his head, sobbing. Patricia stood behind him, her mouth open in a silent scream of denial as an agent moved to cuff her. I slumped against the wall, sliding down until I hit the floor. I pulled the gas mask off, letting it drop into the water. I took a deep breath of the dusty, smoky air. It tasted like victory. It tasted like freedom. An agent moved toward me, his weapon lowered. "Mr. Sterling," he asked, his voice urgent, "are you injured?" I looked at him. I looked at my dislocated shoulder. I looked at the carnage in the room. I looked at my son being dragged away in handcuffs. "I am alive," I whispered. "I am alive." The ringing in my ears from the flashbang grenade slowly faded, replaced by the sharp metallic click of handcuffs ratcheting tight. It is a sound that signals the end of freedom, and for my family it was the sound of a permanent eviction from the life of luxury they had taken for granted. I watched from the floor as the FBI agents hauled Lucas to his feet. He was no longer the arrogant hunter standing on the balcony with a rifle. He was a weeping child, terrified of the consequences he had brought upon himself. He looked at me, his face streaked with tears and dust, pleading silently for the father who had always bailed him out to intervene one last time. But that father was gone. He had died in the water of the swimming pool. Patricia was worse. As they dragged her toward the stairs, she wasn't crying. She was spitting venom, blaming everyone but herself. She looked at me with eyes that were black holes of hatred and screamed that I was a traitor. She called me selfish for surviving. She screamed that I had ruined the family name. I simply turned my head away, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a response. The agent next to me helped me stand. I reached into my damp sock and pulled out the small USB drive. It was warm against my skin. I handed it to the lead agent. "Here is the bridge data," I said, my voice raspy from the smoke. "Here is the fraud. Here is the motive. Here is the smoking gun that proves they were willing to kill hundreds of people on that viaduct just to bury their theft." 6 months have passed since that night. The seasons have changed, and so have I. I stood outside the federal courthouse this morning. The wind was biting cold, but I didn't feel it. I wasn't leaning on my cane. I left that cane in the hallway of the house the day I walked out for the last time. My shoulder has healed, though it still aches when it rains. A reminder of the price I paid for my life. But I stand straight now. I stand tall. I walked into that courtroom not as a victim, but as the primary witness for the prosecution. I had hired the most ruthless team of lawyers in the state. I didn't ask for leniency. I didn't ask for a plea deal to spare the family name. I asked for justice. When the judge read the verdict, the silence in the room was absolute. Lucas Sterling and Patricia Sterling were found guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, federal wire fraud, racketeering. The list was long and the sentence was final. Because of the severity of the bridge fraud and the premeditated nature of the attack on my life, the judge showed no mercy. Life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. I saw Lucas look at me one last time as the marshals led him away. He looked for a hint of regret in my eyes. He looked for a crack in my resolve. He found only the engineer. I had calculated the structural failure of our family, and I had authorized the demolition. I walked out of that courthouse and I didn't look back. I sold the estate last week. The house, the panic room, the wine cellar, the pool, it is all gone. The new owners are a tech family from the coast. I hope they find more happiness in those walls than I did. I didn't keep the money. I don't need millions to be happy. I kept enough for a small, quiet apartment in the city and my medical bills. The rest, $30 million, went into a trust. I established the Thomas Sterling Scholarship for aspiring engineers. It is for kids who come from nothing. Kids who have dirt under their fingernails and fire in their bellies. Kids who know the value of building something real and who would never dream of taking a shortcut that endangers lives. Now I am sitting in a small coffee shop on the corner of 4th and Main. The coffee is cheap, but it tastes better than any vintage wine I ever had in that cellar because it tastes like peace. I have a pen in my hand and a piece of stationery. I am writing a note to Dr. Evans, the man who first told me to trust my gut. The man who handed me a blank sheet of paper months ago and told me to write down my fears when I first suspected something was wrong. I write just 2 sentences. Dear Doctor, thank you for the paper. Now it is my turn to redesign my life. I put the pen down. The sun is shining through the window, warming the table. For the first time in 20 years, I am not looking over my shoulder. I am not wondering who is watching me on a camera or who is listening to my calls. I am just an old man with a cup of coffee and a second chance. I am the architect of my own future, and this time I am building it on a foundation that cannot be broken. This story teaches us a painful but necessary lesson about the nature of trust. We often grow up believing that family is a sanctuary, a place where we are safe no matter what. But the truth is that blood is not a binding contract for abuse. True loyalty must be earned, and blind trust is a liability even with the people you love the most. You must be the architect of your own safety and dignity. Never apologize for surviving, and never let anyone tell you that you are too old or too weak to fight for your existence. Sometimes you have to burn the bridge to stop the enemy from crossing. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat and made you think about the value of resilience, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. I want to know what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have forgiven them, or would you have pressed the button just like I did? Let me know in the comments below because I read every single one. See you in the next story.